With us now is Dr. Sommer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Tel Aviv University. Dr. Sommer, thank you much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, a lot of criticism of President Obama for failing to attach the conditions on the Castro regime to open society up after years.
Yeah, so I think Obama's view here is kind of similar to his view on Iran in the sense that the opening of relations, the opening of financial ties, transportation, political relations, diplomatic relations, etc., will be transformative in the sense that even if he is unable to make the Castro regime go away right now, these changes would lead the leaders and the Cuban people towards change in the sense that the regime will not be able to maintain the status quo. Younger Cubans who are more interested in, in economic conditions, in the internet, etc., and not nearly as interested in the ideology of the Castros, will demand change, and this change is bound to come.
And what does the president hope to accomplish on this trip specifically?
So part of it is the beginning of this transformational process. Another thing is, he makes history. He talks about his legacy. And to a large extent, we need to remember that the president of the United States is constrained in certain ways, right? So he cannot lift the embargo, for instance, because this is the unique privilege of Congress. What he can do, and I think to a large extent this trip is part of the strategy, is to try to constrain the next president in the sense that, if it's Hillary Clinton, Clinton has already explicitly mentioned the fact that she was going to continue the same type of diplomatic relations that President Obama is trying to develop, and therefore there's not much problem there. But if there's a Republican in the Oval Office come January of 2017, President Obama is trying to make sure that this president is so constrained that he's unable to hit rewind and turn back history.
You're sort of leading me into my next question, talking about what Obama can and cannot do without Congress, and you're talking about possibly a Republican president next. He has a Republican Congress now. So what can he really accomplish with this Congress in place?
So we talk about the embargo, right? So that's definitely something that's within the unique province of Congress, and therefore it's something that unless the Democrats win Congress in November, which right now seems quite unlikely, he's probably unable to lift. However, and it's also important to remember that the opposition in Congress is not only among the Republicans, okay? Even among members of his own party, probably the most prominent speaker against his policy is Robert Menendez, senator of New Jersey from the Democrats, who thinks that this is premature, that, as you mentioned at the very beginning of the item, Obama did not place the kind of demands that you would expect an American president on human rights violations, etc., of the Cuban regime. But he's able to do a lot, okay? So if you look at what has been happening since December of 2014, we'll see the lifting of some of the sanctions. We see the establishment of financial ties, transportation. There's direct flights now from JFK to Havana. There's you can take a vessel and from Florida to Cuba, etc. So these kind of things are definitely things that are within the ability of the president to do.
Very quickly, what is Israel's policy towards Cuba, and how could this change now that the U.S. is slowly shifting its position to the island? Okay,
so traditionally, Israel was voting in the UN and other international intergovernmental organizations side by side with the United States against Cuba. Rumors have it that that Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and and Israeli diplomats were caught unprepared to with Obama's announcement in December of 2014. The negotiation was mostly secretive, led by the Canadians, by the Pope probably, or by the Pope. So Israeli diplomats were caught surprised. However, I think that if indeed the United States is going to pursue the same course with this president and with the next, Israel is probably going to work in line with
follow suit along with
exactly.
Dr. Sommer, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And in other world news, flimsy boats packed with migrants continue